We have with us the very renowned Dr. Arun an author, translator and speaker. He's an assistant professor at the Department of English, Government College, Mogri. He finished his PhD in Cultural Studies from the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, and has worked with the Faculty of Humanities in NIT Warangal before shifting to Kerala in 2010. He has worked with the International Shakespearean Desk, Dublin, on localizing Shakespeare. He has written on issues concerning culture, philosophy, and literature. He is a member of the panel of resource persons for UGC HRDC Kerala University and Kannur University, a member of Board of Studies, Calicut University, a member of PASS Board, Kannur University, Director of English Proficiency Program with CDC, and is a research guide under Calicut University. May I please invite Dr. Arun K for an address.
An academic session. This is not a keynote, this is not a presentation. This has been titled as an academic session, and that is exactly what I'm planning to do. As an academic session, I think I should not veer away much from what is given in the concept note for the conference. What exactly is given in the concept note? Let's look at one aspect. This is something that I really want to talk about. How the concept note basically winds up as far as the seminar is concerned. They say, now a century after their publication, the time has come to interrogate their status. They here means like Ulysses and Wasteland, of course. Their status in a radically different socio-political and historical scenario, and how relevant. There are some questions, and these questions are basically the trigger for my academic session. Our academic session is not like a presentation, right? You can participate even as I'm talking, okay? You can give questions afterwards. Anyways, it's okay either ways. Have they become classics of a bygone avant-garde era? Do they still address some of the central issues in relation to form and content? Now, these questions, have they become classics of a bygone era? And how relevant are these texts today? Let's begin from those questions. And let us end with those questions too. See, this is the text that we have been discussing. And this is the text that Nisha was introducing to you as a damn monstrous thing in the morning. This is the text from where she quoted that lyrical excerpt, Modi Bloomcast. This is the text that Chitra was quoting frequently. This is the text that Murli himself found difficult to grapple with and lost interest completely when he was in a central university. This text is not the PDF file that I'll send you as Ulysses. It needs to be in this particular form, and that is where the relevance basically needs to be approached. If I send you a PDF file of Ulysses, or EPUB file, or if you buy this on Amazon Kindle, does that make a difference? Will that make a difference? We are all like people with tablets, not tablets, like the digital tablets, screen tablets. We are all people who read from screens. We scroll and read. These terms are really interesting. Scroll, read, page. We are not reading, we are not looking at pages, we are not scrolling. Technically we are not doing any of those things, but then we prefer to call those activities, the tapping, the tap, swipe, this particular repertoire of gestures that we have in the digital world. How good are Wasteland and Ulysses in this world where we tap and swipe? I recently came upon a website. Some notes, it's a Spark notes, or Clicks notes, or some notes in the internet realm, where the text of Wasteland is printed, and it's very interesting. Some of those words are blue in the sense like if you click on it, it opens another page, it redirects you to another page. Well, not a page, the screen opens up to another screen and you see another script there. Philomel, for instance, you click on Philomel, then you have the legend of Philomel. You redirect to that. Then you can come back, or if you choose, you can go like you can pursue Philomel through the internet. From page to page to page, you go beyond Philomel. Would Eliot be happy with that kind of a gloss? Because Eliot would want you to basically take up Fraser or Jesse Weston, like plod through those pages and find that this doesn't basically matter to the text that we are reading here. There is a percentage of doubt, a percentage of what do I say, a benefit of doubt, something like that. Like you're reading something from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and Eliot is not trying to bring you the entire Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which could be done on internet. And it is done on internet. Like you click on Shanti Shanti, they take you, they take you directly to the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad quotation, and they tell you this is what this is about. There is no two ways about it. You don't need to think about it, because this is not wasteland, it is an information rich land. Not waste at all, there is no waste there. Everything is used. Everything is productive. There is no wasteland. And what is your Odyssey? This is Odyssey. The reader is the hero here, isn't it? I mean, everybody who has read the text knows that there is no Ulysses here. Leopold Bloom is not the Ulysses. Of course, he doesn't measure up. Who is the Ulysses? The reader who goes into this mess is the Ulysses. The reader needs to measure up. Plodding through these things, you are in the island of Cyclops, We are taken through this sea of allusions, and then by the time we finish it up, we feel like, we have done an Odyssey. But the e-text is a very easy text. You see? Easy. When it becomes easy, the monstrous difficulty that we were talking about in the morning, that tragically doesn't exist anymore. Wasteland has become a fertile land, and Ulysses has become a joker. You tap, you swipe, you click, everything is there, right there. The e-text has successfully dismantled what was the peak achievement of, we're talking about peaks of modernity. We are not in modernity anymore. So like the respect that was accorded to these texts, that is also another thing, Where did we confront this text first? We confronted these texts first in an MA classroom. Did we come across these things accidentally in a library? What if we were amateurs and we came across Ulysses and Wasteland accidentally in a library? We take it, we open these things, we keep it back. We go to D.H. Lawrence, that's good. But in an MA classroom, it comes with the baggage. The professor, who is already in awe of James Joyce, puts this thing on the table, and the awe is transferred automatically. The air is filled with awe. You start respecting the text. You start respecting Joyce. Why? You start respecting the professor who taught you Ulysses. Don't you? I did. I respect the person who taught me Wasteland. I respect the person who talked to me about Ulysses. I respect my friend who has not completed reading Ulysses. He's like the best reader that I have ever met. I have a college friend. This is his lifetime project. He actually gave a full-length article in last month's Madhrubhumi about how he will not finish reading Ulysses. That was the car article of Madhrubhumi Journal. I mean, he was my batchmate. I mean, he was my college mate. I respect him for that. I respect Ulysses. I respect James Joyce. I respect Raphael Joseph. I respect the professor who taught me this. This respect is not a textual product. This respect is a product of the context that transacts this content. There is a history of transaction. There is a history of teaching this. There is a history of telling about this to people. This conference is part of that history, where we celebrate two texts, and we repeatedly say that these texts are important to the history of reading, to the history of intellect, to the history of textual modernity, print modernity. I have no doubts. I have no doubts about this, but my perspective is, or like what I want to bring into this session, this academic session is, if we were not academics, if we were to accidentally stumble upon Ulysses in a random library on a random day, And then by chance the experiment that Ulysses is, it strikes us as really, really worthy. Then we go behind it. I want to pursue that Ulysses, that amateur Ulysses. I don't want to pursue a PG student. Because the PG student is convinced of the greatness of this particular work even before she or he reads it. Their PG exams will always begin with, the answers will begin with, this is one of the greatest texts ever written. She hasn't read this. Wasteland has not been read, but then she is convinced that this is one of the greatest texts of English literature. This cannot be like unparalleled kind of achievement. Word. I mean, she doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe it. But then they write it. It's an automatic writing. It's an automatic writing that has been taught to her, that has been taught to her professor, that has been taught to her professor's professor. So it has come down like that. The university exams have always been about wonderful, beautiful, great texts of literature, which aesthetically speaking, have we aesthetically matured to understand Ulysses? It's a different question. Are you aesthetically mature to call this a beautiful text or wonderful text? If you are, then write it. Don't write it if you are not. Well, write it because that will give you marks. That will get you grades. Write it. Go on writing it. Well, anyways, my point is, I am pursuing the perspective of that amateur reader, amateur Ulysses, who stumbles upon Odyssey, this Odyssey, and then makes it a lifelong mission, like my friend, lifelong mission to read this, and then finds complete satisfaction in the fact that he has not completed reading it. That is the best kind of reader available for Ulysses. Because the reader knows that reader is not outside this text. The reader is invited to this text. And I want you to look at what Joyce himself thinks about the meaning of this text. It's a little tricky, okay? It's a little, the bracket that this conference has given for academic session, those questions that I have read out to you in the beginning, that is a tricky bracket. It's a tricky bracket because let us go to Ulysses, let's go to Joyce's own idea about how to read Ulysses. I mean, he knows that there are labyrinthine ways of reading out anything that is printed. This is how, in a conversation with Are the Power, some of these authors, Foucault, Joyce, before you read them, you perhaps need to read their interviews, their conversations. You need to know why they actually attempted such a thing and what is the relevance of it, and then come to these authors and then you would understand. And that is why I want you to look at this particular idea that Joyce was talking about. He was talking about artistic creation. That conversation was with Are the Power, and then he was talking about artistic creation, and this is what he says. Though people may read more into Ulysses than I ever intended, Martin, though people may read more into Ulysses than I ever intended, who's to say they are wrong? It's a typically Joycean way of looking at it. Like, you don't know whether he is serious or whether he is making fun of, the conversationalist who's talking. Other Powers is talking to him. Other Powers is a very straightforward kind of interviewer. He's asking straightforward questions, and Joyce is giving the Mohanlal type of answers. You don't know head and tail out of it. So that kind of answers. But though people may read more into Ulysses than I ever intended, who is to say that they are wrong? Do any of us know what we are creating? So he created this, and then typically in the Joycean artistic theory that he proposes in a Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, he cleans his fingernails and sits as an outsider. This text is out. Well, you are the Ulysses. Get into the text, find out whatever you can, make it your personal Odyssey. Whatever you find is your gain, the text gain. I am not gained by it. Who am I to say what I have created? It is a bailing out, but it's also a radically post-structuralist stance. We have come upon that particular term, post-structuralism, and I'm now looking at that haphazard random reader who wandered into a library and took up Ulysses as his lifelong mission. And what he does is, he goes back to the context of Ulysses, and then he finds that Ulysses is not, as Chitramam was trying to say, Ulysses is not a modernist novel if you look at it from an extra Anglic perspective. Like you would want to think of, say, a work like The Man Without Qualities by Robert Musil, for instance. Robert Musil was writing a gigantic work, and it is an incomplete work. But that is, according to Milan Kundera, the greatest novel in 20th century is an unfinished novel, namely The Man Without Qualities. It's a thick work. I mean, I have tried to read it, but then you go on reading it. You go on reading. It's like you wake up every day and you live your life. That is exactly the way you would read a novel like The Man Without Qualities. You will wake up and you will read it. You will read it. You will read it again. You will keep reading it. It never gets over because it's so thick a book, and it is not complete. Musil couldn't complete it because he couldn't find a way to wind it up. Ulysses at least is a finished book. I mean, Molly Bloom says yes, and it was over. But Musil's novel was not over. Kundera says the unfinished writer in Man Without Qualities and the unfinished reader of Ulysses are like the emblems of modernity. This project is not something that you need to really complete. It's not like you begin and complete it. It's not like any other novel that you come across. So the amateur reader will come across this particular insight, and the amateur reader will understand that he will need to devise a reading strategy that is completely different from the reading strategy or the reading history or the reading prior novels that he has gained through like reading X, Y, Z novels. He will also understand that Joyce was not alone in experimenting with this particular style. What is special about Ulysses is not singularly stream of consciousness. Like if you look into, say, Pilgrimage by Dorothy Richardson for that matter, she gives you exactly what Joyce does in the Penelope section. Joyce's Penelope section, the Molly Bloom section that Nisha and Chitra ma'am has read out to you, that section is basically a derived form. That form is actually the invention of Dorothy Richardson and in some part by Virginia Woolf. Joyce is trying to use it. Joyce uses it beautifully. That is a feat. That last section, the Molly Bloom section, is a feat. I would say the best section perhaps in the entire Ulysses. But that notwithstanding, where is Dorothy Richardson? Why is she not there in the syllabus? You have seen Virginia Woolf, you have seen James Joyce. Who is this path-breaking pioneer, experimental novelist named Dorothy Richardson? What happened to her Pilgrimage? Why is it out of print? Why is nobody reading it? If experimentation and innovativeness was the reason why Ulysses still finds a place in the syllabus or still finds a place in an academy for a conference. If that was the case, then Dorothy Richardson must have been there, right? She was more experimental than, and she failed because she experimented. And Joyce's rejection, we have talked about that. Earlier speakers have also talked about how Joyce was rejected by printers. Obscenity was was a libation. And then he had to fight charges of obscenity. Virginia Woolf was ready to print this. I hope you know the history. T.S. Eliot recommended that T.S. Eliot was in awe of Ulysses, of course, and I have some notes and all, but I'd rather not go into it. Well, Eliot recommended to Virginia Woolf that Hogarth Press publish Ulysses. She actually went into it. That history is also, Deborah Parson makes a note of her. Let me read out how that basically ended as a disaster. Hogarth Press, was owned by Woolf's. Okay. On Eliot's recommendation, this is Deborah Parsons' account of the publishing history of Ulysses, and she cites how Virginia Woolf did not, why Woolf did not publish, why Hogarth Press did not publish Ulysses. On Eliot's recommendation, the Woolfs had considered publishing Ulysses in 1918. Remember, this was published in 1922. If Woolf was to publish it, this would have come out in 1918. But in 1918, through their own small publishing house, the Hogarth Press, but finally refused, ostensibly due to its length, although more probably because they had been unable to find a partner. This is important. They had been unable to find a partner who would agree to work on a manuscript so liable to prosecution for obscenity? See, Virginia Woolf had a problem, a creative jealousy kind of stuff with James Joyce. Everybody knows it definitely. In her diary, she basically writes, how Eliot was all praise for James Joyce. Eliot actually said it on her face actually. You're doing good work, but somebody else is doing better than you. Okay? You have that diary, I have that diary here. He said nothing, this is Eliot. He said nothing, but I reflected how what I am doing is probably being better done by Mr. Joyce. So that section in Virginia Woolf's diary clearly shows you how Virginia Woolf was not, and Virginia Woolf rejected James Joyce. Ulysses was not a text that she used to recommend. She liked the earlier portions, she says, but then all in all, she had a reservation about that work. And she cited that my reservation about Ulysses basically exists because this is the work of a self-absorbed mind. A work should be open, a work should be able to look into the world outside, not like shut itself inside. So as far as Woolf is concerned, the craft of Ulysses was something that shut itself inside. Well, that was debatable anyways. So this happened. My point is, Joyce's manuscript was liable to be put under jurisdiction or put under trial for obscenity. It was put under trial for obscenity. But now it is a classic, definitely. So it is, what is the charge against Ulysses? The charge is obscenity. Here sits the Vaikom Muhammad Bashir's portrait, who was also tried for obscenity for writing Shabdangal. Shabdangal എന്നുള്ള പുസ്തകം നിരോധിക്കപ്പെട്ടതാണ് കേരളത്തിൽ. ഇന്ന് നമ്മൾ ഏത് പുസ്തകശാലയിൽ പോയി കഴിഞ്ഞാലും അതിൻ്റെ മുഖത്തിൽ പറ്റിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടാവും ശബ്ദങ്ങൾ. ക്ലാസിക്കാണ്. പുനത്തിൽ കുഞ്ഞബ്ദുള്ള ശബ്ദങ്ങൾ വായിച്ചത് ശബ്ദങ്ങളുടെ കോപ്പി തൻ്റെ കിടക്കടിയിൽ വെച്ചിട്ട്, കാരണം ആരും കാണാതിരിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി. കൊച്ചു പുസ്തകങ്ങൾ വായിക്കുന്നത് കിടക്കടിയിൽ വെച്ചിട്ടാണ് ആ സാധനം വായിച്ചത്. വീട്ടിൽ കയറ്റാൻ പറ്റാത്ത പുസ്തകമായിരുന്നു. വീട്ടിൽ കയറ്റാൻ പറ്റാത്ത ബഷീറിയൻ പുസ്തകം ഇന്ന് മലയാളത്തിൻ്റെ ക്ലാസിക്കായി മാറിയിട്ടുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ the same kind of history is something that you find in the case of Ulysses. Ulysses was raised from gutter naturalism. That's not my phrase, that is F.R. Lewis's phrase. Gutter naturalism to the stature of a classic. F.R. Lewis is also an important name here because immediately after publishing Ulysses, even though there was a lot of hue and cry, there were a lot of reviews, there were a lot of praise for this particular text, the text was not seen as a classic that will survive the test of time. Okay? And to add to that, you have very influential critical schools. One of the most influential critical party that existed in England during that particular time was F.R. Lewis, and his journal Scrutiny basically articulated the general sentiment. And I'll get back, I'll tell you what F.R. Lewis thought about, how F.R. Lewis denigrated, how F.R. Lewis successfully inverted the fame paradigm. He actually put, F.R. Lewis actually put D.H. Lawrence over James Joyce in his great tradition. And he gives you the reason why he does that, okay? Lewis is, he cites Jane Austen, George Eliot, this is common sense. In great tradition, F.R. Lewis cites Jane Austen, George Eliot, Henry James and Joseph Conrad as the major proponents of novel. Writers, and these people are described as writers who not only change the possibilities of the art for the practitioners and readers, but are significant in terms of that human awareness they promote, awareness of the possibilities of life. Two key terms, human awareness and possibilities of life. He will use the same excuses to bring down what Joyce was trying to do. Okay, when he talks about D.H. Lawrence later, he says, among the novelists of early 20th century, only D.H. Lawrence was similarly deemed to elevate common humanity over elitist artistry. You know who's being aimed at? Elitist artistry is basically about Joyce. Elitist artistry. His innovations and experiments, dictated by the most serious and urgent kind of interest in life, is directly in contrast to Joyce, for whom Lewis had written in Scrutiny in 1933, the interest in words and their possibilities comes first. As far as Joyce is concerned, the interest in words and their possibilities comes first. As far as D.H. Lawrence is concerned, well, innovations and experiments dictated by the most serious and urgent kind of interest in life, F.R. Lewis was a very, very influential critic in the history of English literature. And he was a master of taste building. He builds the taste. And if F.R. Lewis was attacking James Joyce on one hand, Q.D. Lewis, his spouse, was attacking Virginia Woolf on the other hand. Q.D. Lewis, I'm quoting from Q.D. Lewis. Q.D. Lewis defines Virginia Woolf as a socially elitist and aesthetically mannered writer, secluded within the rarefied ivory tower of upper-class Bloomsbury. These are not like random sporadic things that we collect from history. These are like the history of the taste, contemporary taste. It is F.R. Lewis and Q.D. Lewis who are writing off, right? They're writing off James Joyce, they're writing off Virginia Woolf. From that position, from that writing off, how did these people bounce back? What exactly maneuvered, what exactly helped them to bounce back from that gutter? Well, you have the answer. The answer has already been stated in the forum already. The emerging new post-structuralist theories looked upon the novels that F.R. Lewis was hailing as great. The post-structural idiom basically looked at those novels, that kind of novel writing, conventional realism for that matter, that was seen as socially reactionary. And they saw that the kind of experimentation that Joyce and Woolf were doing, that was extremely politically radical. This becomes radical politics in post-structuralist theories. Plus, you would also see that post-colonialism is on the rise. And as we have already seen, Joyce is not being looked upon as a modernist writer. He is seen as an Irish, a prodigal son of Ireland. That is the kind of image that was given to Joyce. And Ireland is a site of conflict, political conflict, and a person who was like an ambassador for Ireland. That is how Joyce is. Now, Joyce and Woolf also, definitely. Woolf, who was dismissed as an aesthete, Woolf, who was dismissed as a socially elitist, reactionary person, she was brought back because she was a feminist. Because she started getting identified with the rising feminist school in Europe and elsewhere. And the questions that Q.D. Lewis basically posited, as far as Virginia Woolf's craft is concerned, you have Jane Marcus and Alex Swerdling, two critics who were very instrumental in bringing Virginia Woolf back. But for Jane Marcus and Alex Swerdling, we wouldn't have the cult of Virginia Woolf yet. One of the most polemically titled works by Swerdling. Swerdling's work is Virginia Woolf and the Real World. And he has a question, Swerdling has a question in that particular book. That book came in 1986, okay? Why has it taken us so long to understand the importance of real elements in her work? Why has Virginia Woolf's strong interest in realism, history, and the social matrix been largely ignored? So you see, the cult of Virginia Woolf was not made on the basis of Mrs. Dalloway, Voyage Out, Jacobs. No, it was built on realism, history, and the social matrix that she was commenting upon. Her accent on the real, James Joyce's accent on the Irish heritage. This is what saved them, and that is why Dorothy Richardson was not saved. The third person in that experimental triad, Joyce, Woolf, and Richardson, can't be, because she is neither a feminist nor is she an ambassador from a country like Ireland. So she'll not be backed. If you want to read real literature feminine, the actual site of the Molly Bloom episode, go to Pilgrimage, pick up Dorothy Richardson, you would find where this actually begins. The experimentation begins there. Mrs. Dalloway is a betterment of that. Virginia Woolf was contemptuous of Dorothy Richardson. She was contemptuous of James Joyce as well. Anyways, but the mutual contempt, that doesn't stand. I mean, as a reader, when you go into these novelists, when you go into the work of fiction, what matters is what kind of experimentation have they done and how much of experimentation had gone into the text variety that they created. Well, But my point is, in 21st century, in the context that we are living, Joyce and Woolf, I'm using Deborah Parsons' terminology. Deborah Parsons says, Joyce and Woolf I'll have more consumers than readers. Within the heritage industry, Joyce has been repatriated as Ireland's mascot to become the marketable cultural figurehead of a Europeanized nation and cosmopolitan capital, a phenomenon that would probably delight the writer himself. Bloom, after all, is an advertising salesman, right? So James Joyce would look at it with a tongue-in-cheek comment, perhaps, but then he is like Kafka for Prague, Joyce for Dublin. So like you can have cultural tours. Joyce would probably laugh at the entire this industry, heritage industry that is built on Ulysses. That is consumer. We are consuming. Maybe we haven't read Ulysses, but if you have a personal library, don't you have a copy of Ulysses? I mean, if you have an e-book library, don't you have a PDF of Ulysses? You're not planning to read it, you will keep it there, right? You're not planning to read Mrs. Dalloway or The Voyage Out, but you will keep that PDF there. Virginia Woolf. I have a folder for Virginia Woolf. Why? No problem, I will let it be. I have a folder for James Joyce. Great. You will keep it because we are consumers, not readers. Those things are products of heritage industry. They come to us without Dorothy Richardson. I need to expressly state that because we need to see that these are products that come to us. And then we are not reading them. To read them, we need to replace ourselves in print modernity. We can read them. It is not like we cannot read them. We need to read them if you have to be real good readers and not scrollers and swipers. Swiper, does that have a... I don't know. There is no word called swiper. Anyways, you keep swiping, right? Swiping, scrolling, typing, clicking. So typer, clicker, swiper, whatever. So if you don't want to be that, and if you want to be a reader, perhaps you need to go back to Wasteland and Ulysses and Pilgrimage and Sound and the Fury and that awful mess on Via Mirulana, whose work, Carlo Emilio Gadda, The Man Without Qualities. Musil. You need to read Musil, Brock, Gombrowicz, Fuentes, Joyce. Who are these people? These people are people who cared for this act of reading the print modernity. They were highly ambitious. Ulysses is a work of towering ambition. This is a work of towering ambition because any great work is a work of towering ambition. When Milton was writing Paradise Lost in 1677, when this thing came out, 1667, when he started writing it, when this came out, he wanted to create an epic. Prose was not the medium of literary writing during 17th century. So he chooses epic, and Paradise Lost is an epic that is born out of a writer's towering ambition. What is his ambition? He wanted to create a book which went behind or beyond all books. Bible starts with Genesis. Paradise Lost starts before Bible. He wanted to have a book bigger than Bible. That was the peak ambition in 17th century. What is the peak ambition in 20th century? This will tell you what is the peak ambition. This is cinema, this is drama, this is poetry, this is fiction, this is fun, this is puzzle, this is labyrinth, this is everything. This is the ambition that Joyce had, because Joyce's attempt was to create something that goes beyond all novels. Like how Milton wanted a book behind, above all works that had ever been written. Joyce wanted a work which went beyond and above every work that was written. And he didn't use the tag of a novel here. I'll go to one particular excerpt from, again, Deborah Parsons, who says that. Joyce, when he was asked about the relevance of fiction, the way fiction interprets words to the readers, he made this comment, again in Arthur Power's Conversations with Joyce. One great part of every human existence is passed in a state which cannot be rendered sensible by the use of wide awake language, cut and dry grammar, and go ahead prose. He basically said novels as they existed in 20th century or like late 19th century cannot be sensible. So he is trashing the history of 19th century novels. Not alone. I mean, the same thing was said by Virginia Woolf and another. Woolf would say, a new question mark by Virginia Woolf. But what? For want of a better word, I am using novel, but I am not writing novel, says Virginia Woolf. So, these people are writing something that will go beyond novel. Go beyond novel. Well, this is what I call ambition. This ambition is important. This ambition is why these works are relevant in that time, in this time, in any time to come. Like how Paradise Lost is relevant, Ulysses and Wasteland will be relevant. And the relevance is not because we have a person who wrote a certain novel, but because we had a person who had ambitions about the medium that he was meddling with. Like how the current idiom is the idiom of the computer, the idiom, the digital idiom. What is the highest ambition? You read people who go gaga about digital literature, people who go gaga about social media, the possibilities of artificial intelligence, the possibilities of post-human existence. This is ambition. The ambition among which we are living is not the ambition among which Joyce lived. The articulation of that ambition peaked in Ulysses. I'll wind up my rather haphazard academic session with a slight hint regarding the historicization of novel. Why, I mean, the concept note, again coming back to the concept note I have read in the beginning, this is also important. Now look at how novels start appearing in other places of the world than England or France or Spain. There is an English history, there is a French history, and there is a Spanish history of novels. But there is also a Kannada history of novel, a Malayalam history of novel. There are African histories of novel, Indonesian history of novel. Novels, by the time Ulysses was coming out, novels were coming out in several other parts of the world. And Indulekha came out in Malayalam. Yeah, other novels also came out, but Indulekha had a preface where Chandu Menon famously said, English noveluകളുടെ മാതിരി ഒരു സാധനം ഉണ്ടാക്കാനാണ് എൻ്റെ പരിപാടി എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ട് Chandu Menon gives a very famous preface. I would like you to look at another preface. This is from the first novel in Kannada. Okay? And this is a preface that Gubba Murugadhyaya gives for that novel. I want you to look at how similar in different languages this idea is perpetuated. That I am taking something from English and I am trying to change it. Okay? So, this is the problem. I don't have a bookmark, so I need to. Anyways, in that particular excerpt, he is also trying to say, I wanted to make an English novel. I mean, translation of an English novel, but I couldn't bring it out. So I wanted to make a Kavya-like novel. Again, that didn't work out. So I was trying to bring together both these frameworks. That is the essence of what he was trying to say. So you need to see it. Yeah, this is the quotation. So this is Gubbi Murugaradhya, author of Sringara Chaduryolpadini, which is supposed to be the first novel in Kannada. This is how he introduces the novel form in Kannada Bhasha. I first had the idea of taking a novel from English and translating it into Kannada. But I had to abandon that plan when, after close consideration of a few such kavyas, they were found to be at variance with Hindu social customs. Next, I thought of selecting a well-known itihasa in verse from our own tradition and rendering it in prose. But this entailed abandoning the social characteristics of the English novel, which was not acceptable. Hence, I decided to write an altogether new story, retaining the Hindu social content while adopting the method/style of the English novel. What is James Joyce doing? He is picking up an itihasa. What is the itihasa? Odyssey. And he tries to bring in the social content. Joyce is much like this alternate modernity novels. Alternate modernity, like the modernity that we had in India, we had different kinds of novels coming out, right? So, I mean, the kind of novels that we had in Malayalam, the kind of novels that were coming up elsewhere in North, they have a separate history, and this history is now being explored, now being studied. There are many scholars, definitely, who are now doing research on publishing history and book history in India, in several bhashas. Well, I'll conclude by introducing another idea, or probably another angle to this whole academic session. Where in 1993, Frederick Jameson, when he was trying to theorize novel, like Japanese novel, Jameson was trying to say how English novel or the Western novel was taken up by other, other modernities. I'll read out from Jameson himself. The encounter between imported technology of the Western form of the novel and the content of social experience of the non-Western importing country will always lead to systematic modification or unfunctioning of the former in the context of the latter. So Jameson says, if a novel tradition has to break up, break out, or break down, whichever break you prefer, there is a content that you are importing, and then there is a local content, a local social content. So James Joyce was trying to import an idea of novel, but then he also wanted to break it up. He also wanted to revolutionize it. He did not want to write a novel. Remember the quote that we have visited 5 minutes back. So this thing that novels require an important element and a social content which is local. This makes sense generally, but it does not make sense to people like Franco Moretti, for instance. With Moretti's backlash to that statement made by Jameson, I'll conclude my session. Moretti's essay, Conjectures on World Literature, Moretti makes this observation. If novel traditions are about importing and mixing it up with the local content, then the French, Spanish and English traditions are not the rules, they are exceptions. And that is not how novels are written. Did you get me? He is inverting Jameson's perspective. He says, importing something and mixing it up with local content, importing the Western form and mixing it up with non-Western form, if that is what you find as producing novels in Malayalam, Kannada, Igbo or any other language, Indonesian languages or any other languages in the world, if that is the norm, then the traditions of novels that have done that far outnumbers the tradition of novels which are generated from within. So the English, French, Spanish novels and novel traditions are not the norm, they are the exceptions. So probably in considering what a novel can do for the contemporary audience, what a novel can do for the contemporary reader, we need to forget the history that James Joyce was asking us to forget. And that is why James Joyce is important to us, relevant to us, and that is why this conference is needed, and that is why this academic session should now come to an end.
Ma'am, for her executive views on James Joyce's Ulysses. Ma'am, your talk on the various intricacies of the style of writing of Joyce and the vivid interpretations of the text was indeed intriguing. Also, thank you, sir, for deconstructing the text to our audience. So your address exploring the history of the text, your views on how we should approach the novel and understand were really something that our audience is now speechless. So I will also thank the chair for this panel discussion. Now we will be moving to the lunch break.